You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 78. Today I'll be talking to Richey Beckett. Alright, so my name is Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. Art Affairs is my attempt at shining a spotlight on the many wonderful people that make up this amazing art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, telling their stories. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, but the best way to stay plugged in is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're really enjoying the show and want to help support what I'm doing here in an even bigger way, check out the Art Affairs Patreon. Not only does it give you an opportunity to help keep the show going, but there are several community-oriented benefits as well, like getting early access to episodes and suggesting questions for upcoming guests. You can find all the information about that at patreon.com/artaffairs. You can also connect with the show on Instagram at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is artist Richey Beckett. Richey is a well-known poster artist and cover album artist who's created art for bands like Metallica, Tool, Mastodon, and a bunch more. But coming out of college, he actually walked away from making art altogether to focus on making music. In our chat today, we talk about this period of his life and how he got back into making art and building his art career. We also talk about how he mostly thinks in terms of black and white, how important his connection with nature has been throughout his life, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Richey Beckett. Richey, welcome to the show, man. It's so good to have you on.
It's a pleasure to be here. And we were just, as we were just saying, it's been some time since we last met. So
yeah, I actually have a picture of me and you next to your booth at one of the MondoCons. It was like MondoCon 1 or 2, so it's probably like that. 2016 or 2017. I still have that. It still comes in my feed every once in a while.
Oh, I love that. What I've found is the further we get away from those MondoCons especially, is like really appreciating even more. You know, like I think at the time the whole thing was such a crazy roller coaster, and for so many people. And more than I think anyone realized maybe at the time, you know, like it's only what I found years later, talking to artists who were there at the time, who a lot of them we were not, you know, didn't know each other when it first happened, and then were kind of thrust together into this crazy situation, and a lot of us had not met before, had traveled from overseas in some cases, you know, like I went out there not knowing anyone really, like, you know, vaguely knowing people from the internet, and obviously knowing the Mondo guys through the small amount of work we'd done together at the time. But then now looking back on it, we all would have assumed at the time probably that I'm the only, you know, I would have thought, hey, I'm the only guy here who hasn't done this before and doesn't know anyone. And actually it was true for probably the majority of the artists there. Hadn't really done things like that, didn't really know each other, and
it was a whole new thing. I mean, everybody was trying to figure it out at the same time, you know. Mm-hmm. And there's like a bonding opportunity in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the great pleasure of Sonny and Biddy of We Buy Your Kids fame. Anyone listening who's not familiar with their work, they go by the moniker We Buy Your Kids, but they're a husband and wife duo. Actually, they were not even husband and wife when they arrived in Austin for that first MondoCon, and they got married they married in Austin, shotgun wedding that time. And my first time of meeting them, I feel like I identified strongly with those guys because it did feel like we were the aliens in the situation, because I was the only guy coming over from the UK, and those guys were coming over from Australia, meeting in Austin, not knowing anyone. So I think we identified as being the outsiders in some way. But the first time I'd arrived in Austin, and the first time I'd ever been there, hopped off the plane, thought, hey, I got a couple of hours to burn before I meet up with anyone officially. Thought, hey, I'll just go for a walk. Hadn't accounted for just how insanely, punishingly hot it was going to be, and just started like going on some ridiculous walk by myself. And within minutes, I was just like dying, and had to just hop into a bar and grab a Lone Star or something. But on my way, I remember this is something that Sonny and Biddy love reminding me of frequently. Is on the way there, I'd caught wind of the fact that Sonny and Biddy were getting married. I think they got married that day or something, you know. And
so wild. And
I dipped into some like Austin, some little weird gift shop and grabbed. I was like, what can I get him as a gift? I don't really know these guys so well, but you know, but I knew that obviously they were visiting Austin, so I got them like an oven glove that had a recipe on it for kind of some Austin chili recipe or something on it. I don't know. Yeah, like, I think it's like a chili recipe on an oven glove, and I got it. And then so when I first met them that night, I was like, "Hey, I got you an oven glove, guys." And then we've been tight friends ever since.
Nice. They're such good people. I love those guys.
They're incredible.
Let's dive into your background a little bit. And I know that you were born and grew up in Barry, which is a town in South Wales, right? So what was that area like where you grew up?
Well, it's mainly known as a seaside town. So Barry Island is this little island. There's a sort of causeway that takes you out to this island, and it's got an old-fashioned fun fair, which back in the day, in like, I don't know what era, maybe even 1920s and 30s, maybe, you know, it was like a huge pull in terms of people holidaying, traveling to Barry Island. And so that's the vibe, like seaside town on one side. But I didn't actually really live on that side of the town. I lived on the other side, and not really that much went on there, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like, in terms of artwork upbringing, you know, if that's what we're thinking about, like, I don't feel like that environment or that place had a huge influence on.
What about nature? Was it rich in nature? Did you spend much time?
It was
outside?
not, but it wasn't. But I was fortunate that my parents were pretty keen on nature and would take us on camping holidays all the time, you know. So we didn't go away, you know. We never left the country, didn't do any fancy beach holidays or any of this stuff that we probably as kids thought we wanted to be doing, but we were fortunate to be taken on, you know. You'd be like woken up at 5 a.m. and chucked in your dressing gown and kind of carried down half asleep and thrown in the back of the car. Well, we actually had this. We had this huge. We had one of those big long wheelbase old Safari Land Rovers with like a 12-seater things. But I have got 3 siblings, so they'd kind of grab us all, and we'd all be. This sounds kind of brutal. That's not the way it's intended, but like throw us all in the back of this Land Rover, and early in the morning we drive off down to the New Forest or somewhere like that. And yeah, so I've spent a lot of time out in nature, a lot of time exploring forests and looking at wildlife and all of that stuff. So when I then finally, about 8 or 9 years ago, moved out of the city and moved up into the countryside, I had a real rush that I still have of just these sensory memories of childhood, you know, like a lot of smells, you know, like smells of certain kinds of bracken and certain plants that just straight up take me back to childhood. And this sort of, you know, is actually a real sense of freedom and joy, you know, wrapped up in that, which is quite nice.
Very cool. And what kind of work did your parents do? Was anything artistic?
My folks were. My dad especially did paint quite a bit. He'd paint. He'd go through phases. Like he painted big cats for a while. I don't know why that was a thing. Like he just kind of got super into painting big cats, and you know, like lions and tigers and ocelots and things. And then got into painting ships. I guess just whatever compelled him that he was interested in. Painted a lot of nautical stuff because he's always been super into boating of all sorts of varieties. And but he was someone who he'd always claim he's an excellent musician, and there were always lots of instruments around the house and lots of music going on. But if you asked him about his painting, he'd kind of be like, "Oh, that old thing, yeah," not, you know. And it was great. It was really good stuff. But he'd always kind of play it down. And I've been trying to encourage him to get back into it at some point. I think he should. But he'd kind of flirt with it on and off. It would come and go. So there was, and photography as well. He was super into. He had a sort of dark room under the stairs, these sort of things going on. So I guess in terms of just the creative pursuits, music, art, all of that stuff was always going on. And my mum didn't really paint and draw so much. She has started doing it now a bit, but generally she's more into, she comes from a family of knitters, like furiously knitting all the time. Like if you're hanging out with my grandmother or my aunts, there's just always this click, clack, click, clack, clack just going on all the time. And every lady in the room is knitting furiously. Nice. So yeah, that was more her artistic output, I would say.
Very cool. And so how did you become interested in making art? Was it observing the artistic side of your parents in that way?
I'd say when I think back and I've done this from time to time, try and think back, okay, what's my earliest memory of really keying into art, drawing, just drawing specifically, and what I do now, just pen and ink. And the thing I like about it is my earliest memories of doing it feel, at its best for me now, it feels the same as it did when I was maybe 5 years old. Like that, if I ever lose track a little bit of why I'm doing it, or lose track of my own engagement in it, when I get to that satisfying place again of just feeling really good about it and really enjoying the process and feeling excited to work on it, it feels exactly the same as it did when I was a 5-year-old kid, and that's something I think about. But so that for me at the time would have been probably reading. I wasn't like a big comic kid or comic guy now. Like I've not really ever been exposed to comics. I feel like the culture over here versus the States, is very different. Like I didn't know kids in school who read Spider-Man and those sort of Marvel and DC comics. But what I did have as a kid was the Beano and the Dandy and those a totally different kind of comic, but it aimed at younger kids, but very British dry humor, kind of a bit, I don't know. There were lots of comic strips. The famous ones were Dennis the Menace and Desperate Dan,
sure,
which are pretty widely known. And they were fine, but within them there were other comic strips inside there. Like there was one called Calamity James, which was all of them had like clever play on words names that as a tiny child you're not going to get the reference of Calamity James, Calamity Jane, but
right.
But the reason I picked that one out is because the illustration style of it was, I still feel, incredibly sophisticated and very detailed, and it had all of these delicious hidden jokes in there, like more like Mad Magazine style, like all of these tiny little jokes tucked into every panel, these little arrows pointing at things and little visual gags. And I loved that because you knew you'd get a lot of bang for your buck. You'd pay 20p or something for this comic and you'd smash through the first couple of pages of Dennis the Menace and Gnasher, which was cool, but then you get to Calamity James, or there was one called Roger the Dodger, which he was this sort of smart ass prankster kid who would just be pulling, setting up little pranks everywhere all the time. So there were clever ideas in it, but just illustratively, they were, I think, way more sophisticated than they've ever been given credit for. And they're the first things that would have directly made me feel like, hey, I want to pick up a pen and I want to understand this visual language. Like that's the way I felt about it then. That's the way I feel about it now. And so that definitely inspired me to do that, to pick up a pen and draw it. And I found that the funny thing when I was a kid that I often get reminded of is that because I showed an interest in it and I loved drawing, I'd spend as much time as I could drawing. Then my friends and relatives and aunts and uncles and all, when it was Christmas or birthday, they'd always buy me art materials, art supplies, and which I warmly received. I loved that, they'd buy me these big multi-pack of marker pens and just huge jotter pads, and they'd always be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's a bit boring. We got you the obvious thing, pens." And I'd be like, "Bring it on! I love it." It's like super into it. But the thing that I'm always reminded of is what I would do is take this big pack of 100 different colors of pen and just pull the black one out and just leave all the others, and they'd end up just floating around my bedroom and never used. And the black one I would rinse, and then. So I always had an affinity for that too,
That's amazing.
I was just really compelled by black line work and what was, because I felt even then, I was like, there's so much to learn with this one tool, you know?
And wasn't it your father that taught you how to crosshatch? I read about how that you had connected with that in a real visceral way at a young age.
Do you know what? That is very true. There were two occasions that I remember that happening. One of them was, they seem so simple, and these are moments that would have taken a matter of minutes, but they are fundamentally important to me in terms of my trajectory of learning anything about that. And one of them was my father. I remember sitting down at the family dinner table one day, just sitting drawing, and he came over and he drew. He was teaching me. He taught me two things in one, I guess, in this, which was, one of them was about lighting, light source. So I think it's something, I might be mixing up two different occasions, but it's something along the lines of, I think he drew a sphere and a cube of some sort. And then he showed me on the sphere, he was like, if you choose where the light source is coming from, so it's going to hit it by here, and that's going to be your brightest point, and then it's going to be dark on the other side, and showed me how it came together. And he probably did that using pencil maybe, but I remember even in those moments having this huge download of a combination of learning, but also just immediate resonance of feeling like, yes, this is my shit. Like I get this. I felt like I was halfway there and figuring those little things out myself from reading those comic books and observing things. But then someone showing you that, it's like, oh my God, yes, it all makes sense. And the other one then with cross-hatching, him just showing me that technique of, if you draw parallel lines across, then it becomes maybe 50% darker. But then if you draw vertical lines across those parallel lines, it becomes another, I don't know how it breaks down mathematically, but it becomes darker again, twice as dark maybe. But then if you pick another angle, 45 degrees, and do that, becomes, and all of, that whole method, and which seems so obvious now, but for someone to show you that is pretty valuable. And it's same as the way I feel about any artwork and the way that I work. It's all a bunch of tricks, it's learning tricks. And once you've got that new trick in your arsenal of tricks, it's like, oh yeah, this is great. Like having the cross-hatching one. And the other profound one is a cousin of mine, my cousin Martin, who lives in Ireland now. He's an artist. He writes and illustrates children's books and makes, he works in a very different way. He does digital illustration, but also does lots of things with cutout paper and modeling clay and all sorts of different mediums. But he was a really keen illustrator and a few years older than me, which is great because if he came to visit, he'd be able to impart these bits of wisdom. And he was into similar stuff to me too at that time, like Warhammer Fantasy Battle and all of that kind of fantasy role play games, but mainly from an art perspective. And so he was passing down some of that. But I remember him one day sitting next to me when we were both drawing, just sketching something, and he was drawing a castle in a really traditional pen and ink style. But he taught me something where he said, if you don't have to draw every brick on the castle, you just can draw a little section of the brickwork, which is enough to tell the person viewing it what that surface is made of. And then the rest of it, you can kind of mix it up and leave open spaces and have stuff that's completely blacked out maybe, but you don't have to. And I don't know if I've taken that on completely, because there were definitely times when I would have drawn every fucking brick on the castle wall. But I do feel like there have been moments when I'm working on something and take that on board. But it was another profound memory of someone imparting knowledge,
that connected with you in that way. Obviously, music has been had a large impact on your life as an adult. What presence did music have in your life when you were growing up?
Oh, pretty big. Yeah, like I mentioned, we were always surrounded by instruments. My dad would play guitar and violin and organ and keyboard, and so we had always multiple different organs and keyboards set up in the living room of our house. So it wasn't like the separate sitting room and living room and music room. It was just like this one room in the center of the house that had a big, like, old American suck organ that's like something out of a Wild West. I've seen these organs in. I remember watching the movie Young Guns 2 and seeing the same organ in the bar in that movie, which made me very happy. But we had one of those in our living room and a piano in the hallway, and then guitars. Then my dad would make these little fixtures to hang guitars on the walls. So all of the walls had like a banjo, a mandolin, a guitar, all these things. Me explaining this, saying, hey, we had a piano in the hallway, and all, it sounds like we were some wealthy, high-class family, and that's not the case at all. Like the place looked like a flea market, it's like just stuff everywhere. But even though that can be frustrating, a lot of it, to be surrounded by that, to be able to reach out and grab a guitar if you wanted to, or play, or for my dad to get up and play, and then we'd always have records playing it. So growing up, it was like Pink Floyd, Status Quo were a big one, who I came back round to really loving recently. ABBA, all sorts of stuff, and then lots of like blues guitar based stuff. Peter Green, John Mayall, that sort of thing. And
I had read that one of your first tapes was actually MC Hammer.
Where did you?
Were you a big MC Hammer fan?
I definitely was a bit. MC Hammer was pretty big in my family, actually.
I had an MC Hammer tape. I think it was Too Legit to Quit, maybe.
That was the one. That was the one. It was whatever year that record came out, and it was a request. My grandmother, my Nana Beckett had asked my parents, "Can you ask the kids what do they want for Christmas from me?" And that was my request to my gran. So my gran would have been like, "I have no idea who this guy is." But it was well received. I remember. Well, I don't think it was as good as his first record, but it was did the job at the time.
Amazing. Yeah. And so I believe it was also while you were in school that you discovered artists that have had a large impact on you. Artists like Doré and Durer, both of which, you really connected with in a deep way. Why do you think those artists in particular and their style resonated with you at that young age? I don't know why specifically. But I do remember it being in school. I always wish we'd studied it to some greater extent, because it would be just a small flash of seeing these things. So what I remember was just our teacher getting up and doing some sort of talk to the class about the Renaissance or about art history as a whole, or some much bigger picture, and then at some point along the way flashing up an image of this artist, Gustave Doré or Albert Dürer, as part of a much longer presentation, and they would just flash up. And I remember feeling really excited and lit up by this. Like, no way, go back to that last slide, like, what was that? So ultimately having to do that research myself, probably many years later, coming back to that stuff, and be like, this was the shit I saw in school that I loved, but at the time, no one picked. They don't have the time to single you out and give you, because some other kid might have seen another slide that they loved, and you can't really do that, get that one-on-one attention. But I wish that had happened. I wish that the art teacher would have seen that and been like, hey, go and check out this book. But I kind of had to piece it all together myself, like we all do. But I feel like I drew a comparison. Maybe the reason, I don't know the reason why I identified with that style of traditional pen and ink, black line work stuff, but I definitely could draw a comparison between even the Beano artwork that I loved as a small child to things like Ian Miller, who was doing those illustrations for the Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and he did a lot of Tolkien, the Tolkien bestiary and all of these things, which is really close to Dürer. It's very stylistically akin to that, but then it goes further into fantasy art, and then any of those artists, I suppose you can draw a line between them all and connect the dots, and it felt like all in. There's some connected world going on there that appealed to me. That's amazing. So did you already know that you wanted to be an artist, like at a young age? Did you is that the profession you were aiming for, or did you have your eyes on something else as a kid?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I think I almost took it for granted. That was I never considered anything else. I just kind of thought, oh yeah, of course, when I'm older, I'm going to still be doing the same thing as I was doing then, just making art for people. And I actually feel like when I was even to the point where I was almost doing it as some sort of job. Not a job, but I used to hustle quite a lot as a kid. So I would draw pictures of things for people as currency to trade for other things, you know? Like if someone had something I was into that I wanted, a toy or whatever, I'd be like, well, what are you into? They'd be like, Street Fighter 2. I'd be like, cool, I'll draw you a Street Fighter 2 drawing and trade it for something. And I used to do that. That sounds like
Amazing.
some crazy, weird, underhanded kind of black market shenanigans, but it was like really innocent stuff. Of just like, oh, you got that cool Gremlins toy? How about I'll draw you a gremlin and we'll trade it for the drawing or whatever, you know? Then, like when I was in high school, when I was in high school, I used to draw tattoos on kids, just as this weird playground hustle. But I'm sure a lot of it was like, I would say to them, "Hey, this will be 20p, and I'll draw you this tattoo." And it was always the same tattoo. It was like my idea as a naive kid of what I thought a tattoo looked like, which, I mean, it was basically like a sword with a snake wrapped around it, maybe a heart or something in there, you know. And I just drew that same thing on most people, but I charged them like 20p in the playground to draw this, and I don't know what I was drawing it with, you know, but like just a Bic pen or some felt tips maybe. But the reality of that situation is I was probably just looking for some sort of validation or, you know, trying to make friends or trying to gain approval or, you know, gain some sort of currency in the playground beyond the 20p I was being paid, you know.
No, it's what you were good at, so you wanted to
exactly. Yeah. So it's similar. So I feel like I'd always been on that trajectory of I kind of never questioned the fact that that's what I'd end up doing or that I'd go to art school or any of that. But the way my timeline goes was kind of strange ultimately, because I ended up when I left art school, I did, you know, went to high school, did sixth form, left high school at like, what would I be, 19 are you when you leave high school, I guess? Went to the art school, did 4 years there, studied graphic design.
What art school did you go to?
Is one, I don't think it exists anymore as in its same state, but it was up in the valleys in Wales, up in Pontypridd and Treforest. So kind of in the middle of nowhere, really, just in the valleys, and called the Glamorgan Centre for Art and Design Technology. And I think it was pretty well known in Wales as being like a pretty decent art school. But I don't know. I feel like I did okay there. I worked really hard. I learned some stuff. But the funny thing to me is I feel like I've been questioning this a lot recently, is you go to art school to maybe try out all of the possible things that, especially with foundation, you get to try it all, you know, and see and I think a lot of people go there not quite knowing what they want to do. So then you try all of these different methods of mediums and techniques, and then one of them chimes with you. Whereas I feel like I kind of already knew what I liked and the way I drew. And I did try all of those other things throughout art school, and then left and was like, nah, you know, and I don't want, I've tried painting and I've tried all of, you know, design. I've tried all these things, and then give me back my pen and I'm good to go, you know?
Right. So your focus was graphic design, like you said. So what did you imagine your career would be as with a degree in graphic design? Like,
honestly, it was only because they didn't have an illustration course.
Okay.
And if they had, I would have done that for sure. And I was toying then between graphic design and animation, and I was real close to doing animation because I always loved it, but I knew that was a way more focused path to take. And I knew that if I did graphic design, it's everything, isn't it? It could be anything.
Sure.
Graphic design can apply to everything, and so it was way more open in terms of job opportunities or whatever I had in mind. But the nice thing about that now, looking back on it, is that I feel I did learn a significant amount about design in general, in terms of laying out a poster or working with typography or some visual hierarchy and in colors and all of those good things, which I probably sort of take for granted now. That I kind of take for granted that I know those things, or that not that I know them, but I have, you know, I'm well versed enough to have an understanding of layout and design based on what I learned doing that course. So it wasn't all wasted. And I did I did film studies on the side as well, which was great. Just got to watch a lot of movies and write about them. So that's something I'm still really passionate about. But then my trajectory though went from when I left art school, I came out the other end and was kind of burnt out on making art in a way. I think I just worked. A lot of people have this idea that you go to art school and they have this idea of an art student being this gothy or hippie layabout who's just going to be smoking weed all day and not really doing much. And then there's all the people who are studying real subjects in the university over the other side of the valley. And in fact, it was very much the opposite, because if I went to the university on the other side of the valley where people were studying like real serious subjects, they'd all just be like, hey, we got like 2 hours of lectures this week, and the rest of the time we're just fucking around and partying or whatever. And the art students, we had to be there 9 to 5 every weekday.
Wow.
You had to show up. You had to be there 100%. You'd work your ass off. And then I had a job working in a hospital kitchen because I had to pay my way through art school. I didn't have any money coming in from anywhere else. So I'd finish my day at art school, go straight to this job, be like washing dishes in the kitchen, and then doing that like 3 or 4 times a week. And then over the weekend, just trying to get the work done for the, whatever the coursework piece we were working on at the time for the design course. So yeah, when I look back on it, it was pretty intense. Just a lot of work, and I had some sort of band going on as well that I was into. But that was ultimately I finished art school, and then I started a band.
Yeah, because you left art for like 10 years or something, right?
Yeah, I really did.
And so, how did you get into making music? I mean, that was like a whole chapter of your life where you weren't making art but making music. Well, making a different kind of art. I guess. Absolutely. And it was very much that I did it because I loved it, and I think I just got swept up and seduced by the whole thing, and really, but also really engaged. I loved the community. I was getting into heavier music, so lots of hardcore metal, and I really loved the underground community that I discovered of hardcore gigs and DIY shows, and that fitted in with things that I felt I'd always done into the sort of homemade DIY entrepreneurial aesthetic of it appealed to me, as well as the music. And to have those two things together, where there's this vibrant community, people are making zines and putting on shows themselves at unconventional venues and making money for charity and doing all of these cool things, whilst also getting to see some insane bands tearing people's faces off, and there's definitely another part of it where, of course, nerdy, quiet little kids like me enjoy getting into a room and everyone beating the shit out of each other for a couple of hours, in the nicest possible way, but most of the time. But in terms of, I also, in my way of thinking, I didn't even question the fact that I was like, oh well, if I'm in this scene, I want to be making music. I want to be making things. I don't want to be in the audience so much. I want to be making things, So I'd been in bands a little bit, and then ended up forming a band which lasted for 10 years of my life, and we did pretty well in terms of, we made albums, and we toured all over Europe. We do month-long bus tours around Europe and the UK. Never got out to the States, but got to see a lot of cool places and meet a lot of cool people. The band was Shaped by Fate. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Shaped by Fate.
And what instrument did you play? Were you vocalist? Were you an
instrumental? I played guitar.
Okay.
I play guitar. Yeah. I never questioned whether, guitar was always the one for me. So people can check it out. It's like really obnoxious, hardcore, sort of progressive hardcore metal stuff. So all the songs are like 7 or 8 minutes long, or well, not always that long, but a lot of them are 5 or 6 minutes long at least. No, just riff after riff, just tons of ideas thrown in, and lots of twists and turns, and lots of dynamic to it. But overall, very, very loud and aggressive, and stuff like, when I think about it now, at the time when you're making it, you don't realize how heavy it actually is. I feel you're kind of so immersed in that world, and you're not as heavy as the bands you're listening to, So to me, I was like, oh, just us guys doing our thing, but have you heard this shit and this stuff that's way heavier? And now when I've gone back, I don't really listen to so much heavy stuff I do once in a while, but nowadays I'm not going to sit there drawing, listening to, being beaten over the head by heavy music. So I don't listen to so much heavy stuff. And then recently, one of my ex-band members had said, "Oh, wouldn't it could be cool to get some of our older stuff up on Spotify, some of the demos and first EPs and things like that, because it's all there, but it's not. This is early days of internet, I guess. So the stuff doesn't exist online. So we were ripping those old discs, and I realized I haven't listened to them since the early 2000s. So like one of them I probably hadn't listened to in 15 years. So, but I put them on, and the first thing is I was like, damn, this is pretty heavy shit. I didn't realize how much at the time when I was making that noise, but yeah. So that, it was a whole thing. It's like it's almost kind of like another lifetime to me now, doing all of that.
So was it paying enough to pay your bills, or were you doing other kinds of work at the same time?
Hell no. No, it didn't pay us a thing. Like we'd hustle our way through enough to be able to do a tour and maybe scrape enough money from the tour to be able to pay the driver and the van hire, and that's it, but at the same time, if you're on tour, you're getting fed and you're getting beer, and you're getting those needs met, so you're not really spending any money on anything. So if you break even on it, that's a real blessing to be in that situation. So definitely didn't make any money from it. Managed to hopefully usually break even on tours. So the way I worked it at the time was I would find myself a job. I'd just go into an agency and ask for just some real basic job, and it's almost like I'm kind of I'm going there asking, can you give me a pretty shit job, like nothing, not too terrible, but something that I can quit any day and not feel bad about it, and they won't mind either. Like that's the ideal job at that time, was like something I can just walk into, be given a simple task. And it would also be that thing of like, I'd get some office job working in some admin office for a supermarket or something like that, just moving, playing around with databases and files, or what, I can't even remember what the work was, but it was like super basic. But at the same time, I'd be sort of secretly photocopying gig flyers, and you got to do that stuff, just like printing out posters, or in work, I'd get the work done, I'd always get the work done that I was asked, but then I'd often stay a little late and use facilities, or just to keep the band stuff ticking over, and just like booking gigs, and always that. So that made the work bearable as well, because I was always on this dual mission of, get the work done, but also get all the band stuff squared away. And then if it turned out a tour would come up and I couldn't get time off, I'd be like, okay, see ya. I'll get another job when I come back. But ultimately I did that for probably a year or two. And then I got through that same route. I got offered a job. I turned up at some agency, and they said, I gave them my CV for this office job at an architectural company. And they'd said, oh no, it's the agency. I went into this agency. I gave them my CV, and they looked through it and they said, you're kind of overqualified for anything we have, and I was like, I know this is, I explained the deal, and they said, but coincidentally, someone had phoned up from an architect's agency that morning and said, we're looking for someone with graphic design skills. And they were like, hey, no one's going to walk in the door who actually has these design skills you're looking for. And then I walked in that day. So they put the two together, and I ended up getting this job at an architectural company, and I worked there for several years, and that was my main one. And they were really cool, because I was working with some really smart people who were, designing buildings and doing really extraordinary shit in the architectural world. So that was actually quite an inspiring environment to be in, even though the work I was doing was real basic, just laying out brochures. Well, actually, so I was laying out brochures, but they were for what they call tender jobs, where you make a tender document to bid for a building. So the actual the gravity of the whole thing was actually that this document I was making was going to win or lose them a job that could be billions,
no pressure,
literally billions, So I try not to think too much about how much of a hand the design of the brochure had in that versus just the statistics in it. But I enjoyed playing with that actually, and just trying to make it look as good as I could, and try and go. I used to enjoy things like they'd give me a photograph for to show one of the jobs they'd done. And in the photo, you could still see there was a little bit of scaffolding on the building, or a bit of a traffic cone, or some unsightly thing that kind of threw off the quality of the picture. So I'd get in there and be photoshopping things out, and I love that stuff. It's super fun, just like trying to tweak and make the photos look as good as you can, and just make everything real neat. And so for that period, I was touring in the band, working in the architectural office, and got to also at least flex the design muscles a little bit at the same time, and probably learn some stuff there too, doing that.
For sure.
And also taking complete advantage of the facilities there to like still printing flyers and designing t-shirts and all of that stuff.
Yeah. So how did that chapter of your life ultimately close and you get back into making your own visual art?
Well, it was kind of specific actually. So around coming up to, this would have been, I think the band started around 2001 and finished in 2010. And somewhere towards the end of that, probably like 2008 or something like that, we were heading out on a tour, and we realized at the last minute we didn't have any merch designs for the tour, for t-shirts, and that's a big thing, is selling t-shirts on tour, of course. So at the last minute, I was just like, I'll draw something. I'll just draw something up, And I honestly had not been drawing for that whole period. And maybe I must have done some stuff on and off. Like I think I did a couple of things for like our band's demo and stuff, but nothing serious at all, and barely drawing at all. And then I drew this design for this t-shirt, and it was two lions kind of fighting. But then I remember in the illustration, they kind of looked weirdly like they were it was always known as the laughing lions, because they kind of look like they're both laughing. I don't know why, but they're fighting is the idea. But it's these two lions fighting, and it's really, if I saw it now, I'd probably be horrified by how crude and the delivery of this piece is. But I did it. I rushed it together, drew these lions, stuck them on a t-shirt, laid out text, got these t-shirts printed, took off on tour. And then what started happening was, quite regularly we'd play a show, and then another band we'd play with would come up to the merch booth after the show, another band on the bill maybe, and say, "Hey, who designed that Lions shirt?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I did it." And they'd be like, "Oh, could you design us one?" And then that just kept happening. And the other guitarist in our band, my friend Luke, he became almost like a manager for me. He was great. Like he would be kind of being asked the same thing, so people would come up to him because he often would jump on the merch, and they'd come up to him and say, "Hey man, who designed this shirt?" And at the end of, we'd do a show, and then at the end of the show, he'd be like, "Hey, I got you 2 more commissions. £50 each." That was what I was charging. It's like £50 for a which is what, like $75, something like that. So for a t-shirt design. So by the time I came home from that tour, then I had maybe 5 different jobs or more to do, however many. So then I'd got to doing those and really got a taste for it, and started making, mostly t-shirt designs. And then the cool thing with that is, what would happen is, as those t-shirt designs go out into the world, other people see those, because it's advertising for what you're doing in its own way. So as those were distributed around and taken out on tour with those other bands, I'd hear other people would get back in touch through them, and who would have said, "Hey, who designed your shirt?" And these things started coming back to me, and before I knew it, I was like, "Hey, I guess I'm doing this now." I'm drawing t-shirts for bands, and I loved it. It felt like it came at the right time, and there were lots of exciting things happening, I think, at that time, in terms of other artists who are really dear friends of mine now, but wouldn't have known each other at the time. People like John Baisley, Florian Bertmer, these guys were doing an Eric Roper, like all of those guys were making art within the heavy music world, but illustrated or painted art. So that felt like it was this resurgence happening at the same time, and I felt this, like, I don't feel like I could have done it earlier, but there was something specific about that time, feeling like seeing this wave coming,
sure.
And sort of catching this wave of like, oh shit, this thing is happening now, and I feel like I've been waiting for it this whole time, almost, as in always knowing what my style feels like and looks like, based on the things I was into that inspired it, and then seeing other artists creating things that resonated with that, and being like, oh my god, this is my shit. is happening right now, and that being able to kind of jump on that wave. So, which is what I really felt at the time. And then I was just smashing out t-shirt designs over and over, just as many as I could do, really. And then in doing that, you end up by necessity having to learn about screen print, because most bands will want it screen print ready. And you're like, okay, I need to figure this out now. I need to learn what that is, and how do I do that? So you just learn by necessity how to set up layered files. And so so much problem solving all the time. And at the time I'm using, I would be going out on tour and doing these jobs on tour then. So I'd be on the back of the tour bus when everyone else is partying and having a lovely time. I'd kind of go off sound check for the show, get back on the tour bus, be sitting there drawing away. And I'd have like my printer and scanner, like one of those little shitty printer scanners that you get for 30 quid in the supermarket. One of those on the back of the bus, and just be able to draw the piece, scan it in, then get on my laptop and be like sorting out the colors and laying it out. And then someone would come into the bus, be like, hey, you got to be on stage in 10 minutes, And that stuff would happen all the time. Like, I remember being backstage at gigs and everyone's around you just getting drunk and Larry and this crazy shit happening. And I'm like, well, I got this deadline on this piece I'm doing. I've got to finish it. And so really juggling the two things for a while there.
So how did you get to the point where you stopped juggling them and just went cold turkey on the music?
Well, the guys in the band had seen this happen, where what I just described to you, they'd seen this happen where I was on tour, but I had these jobs coming in, and they suddenly started becoming. It started out maybe friends of ours in bands, and really excellent bands, but it got to suddenly started becoming bigger, more well-known bands asking for work, and these bigger opportunities coming up. And then I'd done one that felt like a big turning point was one of the first. Well, I started doing record covers as well. At that time, I was making record covers. It gradually, naturally evolved from t-shirts to record covers. And one of them was a band called Victims from Sweden, who are an incredible sort of punk, hardcore, fast as fuck. Just an amazing band. They commissioned me to do their record cover art and inlay art for that. But the record was coming out on Deathwish, which was a record label that I had worshipped my whole life, having come up in the hardcore music scene. And it's run by Jacob Bannon from Converge, who's amazing visual artist, super inspiring figure in that community. So I can remember being backstage at a show trying to finish this artwork, and then getting an email from Jake because he was overseeing the production of this record and the layout of the art and all of that stuff. And before I knew it, I was like, holy shit, I'm working with Jacob Bannon now. Nice. It's a huge deal for me. And he's someone now who's like a good friend of mine now, and we've done a lot together, and always been such a very generous with he's taught me a lot. He's always been incredibly generous with his knowledge, and even since then, like I remember him guiding me through, because he could tell, he knew how much I wanted to do something really good with that artwork, but I was having issues with figuring out practical things. How do I scan in a color painting, and how do I all these sort of things, how to do technical stuff that I was, which I still struggle with now, but he was very generous with his sharing his knowledge on that, and guided me a lot at that early stage. So yeah, that was going on, and the guys around me could see that I was getting to this point where the scales were tipping on the amount of work that I had coming in that I could potentially take on if we weren't going on tour, And we'd been working on an album for 4 years. We were working on this record, recording it over the space of 2 years, and then we were just gearing up. We'd got a new record deal, and we were just about to put it out on this new label, and then we would have been on probably a 2-year touring cycle after that. And it was this tipping point then of like, I need to. This is going to be a decision made here. Either I'm going to commit to putting the record out, jump on this touring cycle, and be able to maybe do a little bit of art, but I could see this opportunity, which thankfully the other guys really saw too, that I could do this for a living if I get on it right now, if I take on all these jobs, and if I really put all of my energy into it. But the way I am with stuff, I'm very tenacious and almost single-minded, and if I jump on something that I'm really passionate and into, I'm very singular with that, in the sense that, in the same sense as how I managed to just do the music for so long, and people are always like, why weren't you making art too? And it's like, I really commit to I find it easier to commit to one thing,
Sure.
So thankfully the other guys in the band were really understanding of all of that, and they supported me in quitting the band, basically. Well, that was the end of the band. Yeah. Because I was very much the ringleader of that, I guess, so yeah, if I stepped away from it, then it was not happening. So but they were really cool about it, so they supported me doing it, and quit the band because we weren't going to be touring. Then the label weren't going to put the record out, so we sort of put it out ourselves a few years later, but yeah, those guys, I was really thankful, they were so cool about it all. So I quit the band and then had that opportunity to really throw myself full time into making art, and doing probably mostly record covers then at that point.
Yeah, and you've since made record covers for bands like Mastodon and Metallica and Hex Vessel, I think Cave-In more recently.
Yeah.
How do these projects usually come to you? Is it usually the band members that make contact with you, or is it someone from their management team?
Usually. Pretty much always the band members, which is really cool. And it's something which I feel, because that was always how it was starting out, and because it was just, meeting bands directly and playing with bands and being in that side of things. That's the only way I'd ever known it to be. And if ever it's more like a management type thing, or a client and these sort of official channels, I always struggle with that quite a lot, actually, the formality of it and the distance between you, and it's like, well, just let me speak to them, but mostly it's not that. Like, mostly it is, I've been fortunate that on probably, like, certainly all of those that you've mentioned, it's always just been band members directly hitting me up and getting in touch, and then when it comes to it, there's always a point where it's like, okay, well, we need to hand you over to the official, people. But then even that, everyone I've dealt with at these various record labels has been super cool too. I hear so many stories of people, friends of mine, who work more in the editorial world and these other sort of commercial art ventures, and nightmare scenarios with clients and art direction and revisions and all of that stuff. And I feel like I've managed to avoid that, thankfully. But I also feel that having done that period of being on the other side of it, as in being in the band, that I feel like that's taught me a lot about understanding both sides of it, hopefully. So if I'm communicating with a band, I guess in as much as I feel like I got an understanding of the stakes of, like, what if a band comes to you with a record and they've been working on it for maybe 4 years, like my band had, if they've been working on it for all that time and there's all of this invested in it, and then they're passing it over to me as being the final torchbearer of the person who's going to say, okay, this is what this looks like now going out into the world.
The identity of their art. I mean, and it's the face of it. It's a huge,
it's a big responsibility, but that can be exciting and exhilarating to take on that challenge. And I feel something about that has always felt good to me, of having that bit of insight, of knowing the other side of it too, to some extent.
How involved in the process of creating the imagery is the band usually?
It varies, I guess, a lot. From sometimes it'll be someone showing up just saying, hey, just do your thing, being like, maybe a rough idea, but generally they're coming to you saying, we've seen your work and we dig it, and we just want you to do something like what you do, which is great, and I love that. For obvious reasons, that it's definitely more open and less pressure in a way, but, well, I don't know, it's still pressure, but then sometimes very specific. Yes, for sure. It varies immensely, and sometimes it can be real tricky. And I think a lot of it, what I learned along the way, was to kind of have confidence in my own opinions at certain times, because what I realized was, I think early on, whatever someone said, when I feel like I didn't have quite so much because obviously the more work you make and the more of your own visual identity and understanding of your own visual language that you have, then the more confidence you can have to be able to step forward and say, hey, well, I think actually this is a good idea because of this, because I've figured this out, whatever. But having some sort of authority over it. But I feel early on I would have just gone along with what anyone said. You know, like if I came up with a thing and then the client, the band would say, well, we think, could you include this and could you add this and could you add this? And that's often the case. I think it happens very often that they're putting forward this big chunk of money that they for you to do the record, and they really want to get their money's worth. So they'll have like every member of the band is jumping in with ideas and art, you know, kind of art directing from the back, and that can be
designed by committee.
Yeah, man, and that can be a struggle because what will happen is a classic too many cooks scenario, and with that, what I learned from kind of the hard way is that someone would pitch in and say, hey, can we add this to this? Can we throw this thing in? Can we add more of this color? All of those things. And I'd be like, yep, whatever you say, I'll send you send it back tomorrow. And then I'd just end up completely killing the artwork. You know, it was done last week, and then now I've killed it because I've tried to add all of these things they wanted me to add. And then there was a specific occasion where that happened, and then they were like, yeah, I think we liked how it was, you know, a week ago. You know, on the actual original piece of artwork has been, you know, destroyed, but thankfully I had it scanned from before. But what it taught me was I realized, and it's not their fault, like they're all just they're creative minds who want to have input on it, and they all have feelings and opinions about it. But what I've realized is that they're commissioning you as the artist, and actually if I piped up and said, hey, I think that's a cool idea to throw these skulls in here or whatever thing they're asking, but if we do, the whole sort of visual hierarchy of the piece is going to change because the presence of them are going to divert our attention here. It's going to become way too complicated or visually complicated, or the colors are going to clash with the palette I've already established, or whatever the thing is. And usually if you articulate that, it pretty much it's always well received. And in fact, to the point where they'll actually think, well, we are getting our money's worth now because we've got someone who knows what they're talking about here. So usually they won't be like, no, I want it my way. It's usually if you say, yeah, that's a cool idea, but can I explain to you why this is working right now, or at least my intention for why I think it's working, or my idea behind it. And then they'll be like, oh yeah, cool, man. I never would have thought of that because they maybe haven't studied design or whatever. So
yeah, because I mean, that's a great way to think about it. It's like they're not just paying you to take their direction. They're paying you because you're an expert artist, and they're paying for that expertise. And part of that is your professional opinion. So it's good that you recognize that that's part of that contract that you have with them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it still happens a lot. Like it still happens to me now all the time where I'll slip back into that same thing where I'll be asked, say, you know, the client will say, hey, we've got an idea for this, you know, you don't have to do it, but this is our idea for the post. And I'll be like, yeah, okay, great. Yeah, let's do it, you know, thinking it'll make them happy by doing what their idea is, even if I'm not completely 100% sure if it's good or not, or if I'm not maybe even that excited by it. And then the work ends up not being as good as I wished it was. And then I realized after the fact, oh man, if I'd taken that on board, but then maybe come up with my own ideas, something completely fresh and new, could have been more interesting, or something I'm more excited by. It's tricky. Yeah, it's real tricky stuff to navigate. And I think it's often you just got to check back in with yourself and just, kind of remind yourself that is why they're coming to you, you know, to bring your knowledge and all your tricks.
And so sort of adjacent to the work that you've done making art for record covers is the work that you've done making gig posters. Was that just sort of, I mean, you've done posters for Grateful Dead and Nine Inch Nails, Tool more recently, the Pixies to name. I mean, there's a ton of really high profile bands that you've made art for different shows over the years. How did that become a thing for you? Is it just a natural extension of what you'd been doing on the album covers?
Yeah, I think it was, but then I think also I was thinking about this recently in terms of trying to figure out that, because that part of the trajectory is a bit muddy to me. I'm not exactly sure where that happened, but I think a part of it was that I can't remember what would have been my first gig poster or anything like that, but I do remember that when I was working mostly in t-shirts and record covers, but having this realization partly because I needed to figure out ways to make more money out of it, because being the kind of artist that I am, who takes a really long time and works in a very meticulous labor-intensive, time-intensive way, then it means that I can't necessarily make, even if I'm paid top-tier amount for a record cover, if I'm taking a month or 2 months to make it, then it's still not going to work out as a good hourly rate, And that's on me, really. It's like I could work with a major label band and you kind of hit the ceiling pretty quickly on what bands can pay or will pay or what labels will pay for record art. So I was always had to try and figure out sustainable ways to be able to find more longevity in the work, which included making screen prints. So, because especially with the t-shirts being set up for screen print, it was very easy then to think, hey, maybe I could make, if the band is cool with it, which they usually were, maybe I can make a limited run of screen prints with the same artwork. And the way that I would draw for record covers, just by default, I would build the image in the same way as I would a screen print, just because it's what I knew, So even if it was never intended to be a screen print, it was constructed in that way anyway. So usually I've always had that idea then of, having a word with the band at some point and saying, hey, I can do this job for you that's going to cost X amount, but would you be cool with me doing maybe 100 prints out of this, an art print, a one-time only thing? I make 100 prints or whatever the number is as an edition of screen print art prints, no band name on there. And I started doing that kind of early on as well. So I think having that running alongside it meant that I was seen as someone who could make posters as well, because I was kind of already doing it. So I suppose it was just a really natural transition to then be asked to make gig posters. And the freedom that I've found from gig posters is mainly what I've done, apart from the Cave-In record artwork, which was a huge project, which I loved. And that was one that we worked on over quite a long period of time. Apart from that one, I haven't really done many record covers in the last few years. And I've predominantly done gig posters, and mainly because it's just such a more versus what we talked about earlier of the intensity of having to carry the torch for this huge piece of creativity that the band has made. Then the freedom with a gig poster is like, rather than having this super intense, very specific brief, it's the exact opposite, where the brief is always just like something that looks cool, is like, that's the brief usually.
The stakes aren't as high. I mean, it's one show and several in a tour, right? Yeah,
it's literally celebrating a couple of hours of a day that's happening once, that's exactly it. The stakes are not as high, and I feel like a lot of bands really enjoy that freedom themselves too, in terms of being able to see what their band looks like through some other weird filter, artistically and visually, without having to commit to it and say, this is what our band looks like, because most bands have some sort of visual identity which they carry through record campaigns and maybe their own merchandise, things like that. But it's like, what if if Frank Kozik did a Mastodon poster or something, if that had happened, then maybe it did happen. I don't know if he ever did that, but thinking of an artist like that whose artwork is really flamboyant and bright and bold, it's not something that ever would be on a Mastodon record cover, probably, but it could totally would exist in the gig poster world, So, and it's the same thing, I guess. Like, I couldn't imagine necessarily my artwork being on a Pixies record cover, but I've designed posters for them, and that makes sense in that world. So, it's just an interesting playground where you can really you can experiment is the main thing. That's the other key thing, I think. Because of, like you said, the stakes being so much higher on record art, if a band comes to me and says, hey, we've seen your shit, we really like it, and we want you to do your thing for our record cover, and that's what we're investing in, you've got to come through with that request. It's got to look like what they've commissioned you for, and you can't, it's much harder to come back and be like, well, guys, I've got this crazy idea that I want to make something way more abstract and simple, or way more complicated, or I want to do this weird thing, they're going to be like, I don't know. And there's such the time limit on it and all of that stuff. It's much harder to experiment in that world. Whereas with the gig poster thing, you can really be just operating on that edge of experimentation and trying new things. And usually the way that I've tried to play it with that is leaning into really trying to feel into what I'm excited by at that whatever given time. And just because I know that's going to give the better result, if I'm just going through the motions of trying to just regurgitate some previous thing I've made or just do something as a methodical process, then the result's never going to be good. Whereas if it's something that might be a bit more out there, a bit more experimental, or a bit more weird, but I'm excited by it, that's always going to be done in a more efficient way and just be the results were, it's an experiment, so who knows, but usually that pays off.
Are there more opportunities to monetize it when it's for a gig poster, like different avenues that you
in a similar way? Yeah, there could be. In most cases absolutely, because in most cases with a gig poster, you end up owning the rights to the art. Not the name, obviously. I can't start printing Pixies t-shirts, but I can use that artwork and put it on a t-shirt, which I have done and do. So definitely another thing for the longevity of the artwork, being able to repurpose things. And so in most cases with the concert posters, I'll have usually a run of artist proofs that I can sell. Sometimes it's purely based on artist proofs and you don't get a commission fee for it. You just get to sell the artist proofs, but you would earn more through that than you would through a commission most times anyway. It all depends, and it's different from artist to artist and who your audience is and all of that. But for me, once again, because it's such time consuming work, then to try and find those other avenues of getting some mileage out of each piece. So making art prints down the line and repurposing them in different ways, and I'd never want to do that. I'd never want that to be the sole reason for putting those things out there. That kind of it's got to stand up on its own feet too. I've got to make the art print because I see the value in that art print and I want to experiment with that or whatever the intention might be. But
for you as a livelihood, it has to be sustainable also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. And I struggle with that, like we all do. I struggle with it because it's such a strange, unpredictable way to work. As in, I'm not getting a monthly paycheck coming in, and I've had a couple of different accountants now, and the last one especially, they were always so completely baffled by my accounts. And I'm like, I tried to explain to them over and over. I'd say, okay, here's the thing, because they'd be like, well, you made a decent amount of money last year. The business is doing really well actually. But this year, you've only made, you haven't really made anything for the last 3 months. We're really concerned about this because last year you made all this. And I kept saying to them, well, that's because I made a piece of artwork for a record. It took me 2 months to draw and design and lay out and finish. I probably won't get paid for another month maybe. And then when I am paid, that's still not a great amount of money. But if I then make some screen prints and sell those down, so this whole, the cycle runs it could be running for 6 months before I get paid properly or get the payoff of something. And it might be that 1 year. So a classic example is like 1 year I worked on a series of posters all for concerts that happened within the same month of the summer, all in July, because there's so many big shows going on at that time. So all the work I'd done ended up coming out and, being birthed into the world at the same time. And then the money I would have made from selling those in a sort of big blowout print sale all came in one go. So like my whole windfall for the whole year basically happened in one evening, So the accountants were always baffled by this. And I was always trying to say, it's not that complicated. It's actually really, really simple, but it's just very erratic. And you've got to look at the whole year. You can't look at weeks or months or any of that stuff. But equally, it's kind of scary. It's a precarious place to be because you can't guarantee anything. And even from year to year, it can vary wildly. And I know I could be more serious about that if I wanted to, and I could lean into that and get real serious about making money and how to do it. But it's not really the life I want to be leading, and it's not where I want my mind to be, and I don't want to be compromising. If I can have the freedom of creativity to be able to move forward as the way I am now, and not have to worry, be making enough to not have to worry about it, that's a sweet place to be, rather than be somehow focused on trying to monetize everything. And
Right. Are there any bands that are still on your bucket list? I mean, obviously you've worked with some big ones, but any ones that are like your dream project?
I don't know, because I'm like, it's the thing that confuses me about it sometimes is that I feel once you have worked with a band, it changes your relationship with them in some way. Not necessarily in a bad way, but it does, just something about just reaching through that veil in some way. It does change your relationship with them. And definitely having worked with Mastodon, a massive one for me in terms of being a band who I was deeply inspired by Paul Romano's artwork. I had the full-size poster of the Leviathan, the extended kind of Leviathan cover art as the centerpiece in my living room for years after seeing Mastodon playing like a tiny 100 capacity venue when they were just started touring Leviathan, and grabbed that poster and had it on my wall that whole time. And really, everything about that band resonated with me, the imagery, the artwork, the whole sound and everything. So that's an example of a crazy ton of events to actually then down the line be having made so much art. I probably made more art for them than any band, so that's a beautiful example of that. And now they still mean so much to me, and I consider them friends. Well, yeah, they are. Certain members are really good friends now as well. So it's like all of that is just wild and crazy. And so even just that alone, and so many other bands I've worked with, and working with bands like Caven, who I've such an important band to me. I remember speaking to Stephen Brodsky about this, like recounting stories about like things like my old band would be interviewed about our influences, and Caven were always in there as such an important band to us. So it's like those things are really cool to come full circle. So I'm really, those things feel really right to me, in a way. They feel insane, but also very right as well. Whereas I think there's other examples, like I almost feel afraid to even say any, because I'm like, if this almost feels like there are certain ones that have come up where I've almost had opportunities to work with certain bands, and then it hasn't worked out for one reason or another. And then I've almost felt like maybe that's for the best because of that thing. Yeah, you can't go back. Like I feel like it just changes something, So I think there's somewhere I'm kind of afraid. I'm like, I kind of am happy for them to be where they are and just keep keep that distance.
The ones that are meant to be will come about when they come, right? Mm-hmm. Diving into your style a little bit more, I wanted to talk to you. Earlier at the very beginning, we talked about how nature has been a part of your life, and you had a connection with it since a young age, and then you later moved back to the countryside, which the photos that you post on Instagram, beautiful area in South Wales, I guess. And the artwork that you make itself is often lacking industry and very kind of nature rich. Does that connection with nature that you had at such a young age, did that drive the sort of direction you go with your art and some of the themes that you explore?
Yeah, I'm not sure which way around it goes in terms of that. Like, I think, there's definitely something deeply rooted in me from growing up, and that being the happiest place to be, like running through a field and digging in the mud and collecting things. I was always collecting things as a kid, things I would find that were interesting to me, and have then continued, rediscovered that from moving out into the countryside, where I'll always come home with pockets full of weird, interesting little things that might be inspiring to draw, and just surrounding myself with this sort of cabinet of curiosities of things that I would collect and find and directly inform the artwork. But it's funny. It feels almost like such a cliche to say about, I'm so surround myself with nature and it so deeply inspires my work and this stuff. It sounds real kind of cliche to say, but it really does. Like in terms of but in a very simple way, in terms of walking around and seeing shapes and forms and picking things up and looking closer at them and studying them. And I take photos all the time for reference. I like it. Yeah, I have to do it. Like I'm just always photographing things, and it could be tiny little, just something that catches my eye, and I'll be thinking about how it translates and how those shapes. Because I suppose it's also about what I mentioned earlier about learning tricks. It's all learning tricks in terms of mark making and ways of creating forms and structures and movement and all of these things. And I have this definitely a little visual conversation going on with myself of seeing a strange shape of, like, at the moment in the place I'm living at now, there's a lot of the people around here really take great pride in their gardens and grow lots of extraordinary exotic plants and roses and all of these things. So pretty much every day I walk out the door and I'll see some new crazy structure, leaf structure, petal structure that I maybe have never seen before. And I'm just like, oh my God, I never knew this thing could exist, and I want to put it in a drawing, because rather than just sit there waiting for some divine inspiration to come and make a mark on the page for you, it's like these there's just such a deep wealth of more incredible shapes and forms than I could ever draw in my lifetime or even get close to, and they're all there for the taking. Yeah. So it's just like this free, crazy sort of candy shop of inspiration. So that's kind of the way I see it, is just going out exploring and coming back armed with all of this cool reference material for things. And it's kind of like when I was a kid, I always used to feel I couldn't understand why everyone wasn't doing these things, because it's all just free. It's just free. You can just, like, with a very inexpensive set of tools, just a pen and paper, you can just do all of this. But and I still feel that now. I still don't understand why everyone isn't doing it, but it's probably, there'd be a lot more competition if they were. So.
So is it these explorations into nature and bringing these reference materials back and really appreciating the beauty of them? Is that what drives a lot of your ideas for the work that you make? Do you have, like, just a sketch routine daily that you kind of pick apart some of these different ideas?
Yeah. Well, I say, yeah, I don't have a sketch routine. I wish I did, and I don't know why that doesn't work for me. I always have these little moments of resolution of saying, okay, I'm going to start. I have lots of empty sketchbooks, like I always start to think I'm going to start sketchbooking. I'm going to do morning pages and all of that stuff. And I know it works really well for people, and I love the idea of it, but for some reason, I've never disciplined myself into doing it. So I have a really clear, focused idea of something I want to create, almost to the point of seeing the finished thing and just go straight into it. Like, I really do. I very much, I don't even realize how strange, that is quite strange, but when people ask me about, sometimes I'll get asked, say for example, people want to buy some artwork, but they are not going to be able to afford a finished. No, I don't sell much original artwork anyway, but the people often ask, oh, well, do you have the concept drawings or the sketches or something we could see or have access to or maybe buy or whatever? And then I'm like, actually, no. Like, I don't do much sketching or concept stuff. I really just go headlong into it.
So you just jump right into the final ink drawing usually? Kind
of. Not in as much as, not like there's a blank sheet and I'm just going in with the pen, but into, I'll gather reference together, photographic reference. If it's a figurative drawing, I need to have that. I often find people will assume, because I do often draw figures, they assume that I'm well versed in anatomical drawing and life drawing stuff. I'm not. Like, I've done life drawing plenty, but like I can't, like a comic book artist, sort of Marvel artist or someone in that world could draw an anatomically correct person from all these different angles and stuff. I can't do any of that stuff. I need really good reference. So if it's a figure drawing, I'll ideally set up some sort of shoot. I mean, I say a shoot, I mean, it's on my phone in my house, but set up some sort of shoot to capture the model reference I need. And then I'll just gather together. Very often, like I said, having tons of stuff on my phone, I'll go through and harvest all of these photos that are relevant to the piece I'm wanting to make and chuck them all in a folder somewhere, print out a pile of printouts of all of these reference pieces, Maybe do a sort of some sort of digital layout rough thing of the poster or whatever the thing is. But I'm usually, because I know it's going to take a long time to do the inking anyway, I kind of just want to get to it. So I'm usually inspired by the idea pretty quickly, get a really, really rough, loose pencil sketch out, and surround myself then with printouts of all the visual reference I need, and just get to it as quickly as I can, usually.
Wow.
Yeah.
So at what point, as you're conceptualizing the piece, does color enter into it? If it's going to be colored in the final print, is that part of the original concept, or does that come in later sometime?
Man, that's a really good question, because I feel like early on, I always used to fall into this trap of not ever thinking in color at all. Like it was this whole thing that I was almost, I guess I was fearful of it in a way, because it's such color theory is a huge thing and something that I never really learned about. And growing up, especially if you think about most of the prime influences for me are all monotone, black, like those B&O comics, or someone like Harry Clarke or Virgil Finlay or Aubrey Beardsley, or any of these guys that I really was deeply inspired by. The work of theirs that I love the most is always just straight up black line work, pen and ink stuff. So so that's the way I think. And if I'm thinking about a poster design, I'm thinking of it in those terms, or at least I was for a long time. And then, or a record cover, I'd draw it out, and then I'd send it to whoever the client was. And very often they'd get back to me and say, they'd say, "Oh yeah, we kind of figured that we thought it would have more color in it." And I'd always be like, "Oh, what are you wearing?" No, there'll be color, but we're thinking about the design now. This is the it seems crazy now, but that was the way I was with it. I'd be like, no, that'll come later. We'll work on the design now, and of course there's going to be color, but let's not worry about that now. So I would actually, that would be the process. Then I'd design the thing, and then I'd get to this point quite late in the game when probably the thing was pretty close to being due, and then start adding color, and then get lost in this whole world of, oh my god, so many decisions, so many permutations, I don't know where to take it. And so having done that, now I try to try to go in, like you said, just with the color in mind as early on as I can. I still really struggle with it. I think color is just such a crazy beast to wrangle, isn't it? But I have grown to love it too. I think if I find that I have successfully used a color palette and used the strengths of different colors to perform different acts within the artwork, then that can be really satisfying, because it's something that doesn't come naturally to me. It's something I've had to be always continually learning about.
For the works that are destined for screen print, how much of that aspect of the work do you participate in? Do you do your own separations and build out the file?
Yeah, I always have. Yeah, part of it is that maybe just some, I guess there's some part of me which doesn't want. I don't want to say I don't trust some. It's not like I don't trust someone else to do it right. It's more just some fanatical part of my mind of wanting to know, wanting to know how that looks, wanting to know how the setup of the screen print was made, wanting to see the trapping and all of those things. So it's not that I don't trust anyone else to do it, but it's more just it's more to me because like I said, I've learned just through doing it that way. I've learned to build the image in that way anyway. I'm like, well, what other way would I do it? Why? There's no point in me going in and making something as a flat image that needs separating or whatever. Like, it makes sense to me if I'm going to, because I'll draw the pen and ink piece, which then becomes the key line, and then is just like this wireframe to be filled. Like, I always think of it as like painting the back of a stained glass mirror, like just filling in these panels. And because the illustration work itself is pretty detailed, the actual coloring has to be quite simple in a way. There's no point in getting in and coloring every little piece, and so it's usually quite large blocks of color. And usually I'll actually go in and overwork it and then pull it back. So I'll go in and I'll add many colors and maybe go over the line of like 6 or 7 or more colors to a point where I'm like, okay, now it's kind of chaotic. The colors are not really doing what they should, and it was better yesterday, sort of thing. And then I'll come and try and strip them down and consolidate them and start thinking, okay, well, we've got this tone of green here and this tone of blue here, but what if they were just the same greeny blue color, and would it feel the same? Would it achieve the same? Is there each color has to really earn its place, And so I'd end up then start sort of relegating all these colors to bring it down to as few as possible. And I like that. Something I love about screen print is having that discipline. I like the structure of those rules, of having a reason to try and be really economical with the color. So yeah, I because I build it in that way anyway, it just makes complete sense that I would deliver a file ready for print. And like I said, even if something's not intended for print, I make it that way anyway. It's kind of the only way I know.
As part of designing and making all of those decisions in the digital file, do you also need to know what the background color, what the color of the paper is going to be? Some of the work that you do is on dark color. Does that factor into how you approach it? Yeah,
it's something that I've learned. I guess I always did it this way with screen prints, is trying to, in that spirit of economy, with trying to print using the least colors and as few colors as you can, and with that same economy, having the paper potentially be another color. It's something that is fun to play with, and if it's done right, it can be really powerful. Versus, I don't even know what else. Once again, that's the only way I can think of it. Like I can't imagine just printing on white paper, and I know tons of artists do, But for my specific thing, I also think of it quite akin to. I was thinking about this recently. I also came up in art through spending a lot of time with tattoo artists and getting tattooed a lot myself, and knew lots of my friends were tattoo artists, and I was sort of adjacent to that world a lot during those times we talked about, and I was always fascinated by that idea of how in tattooing traditionally, if you imagine the classic scenario, which seems like such a sort of cliche thing, but those stories of tattoo shops setting up in coastal areas in America, and you'd get a ship which would turn up for shore leave for a weekend. All the sailors would get off. They'd all go and get tattooed, but they've got a very limited time. The sailors probably don't have so much money, so they're like, okay, we need to be able to make quick, efficient tattoos to tattoo as many guys as we can, but they need to be happy with that tattoo. It needs to be good, Firstly, if it has to be good because there's a bunch of burly sailors who are going to be unhappy. We don't want them to be unhappy with what their tattoos, but also we want them to tell their mates, and we want them to come back, same as any business like that. So the goal with that is like, how can we use just 3 colors, maybe like black line and then green and red and yellow. How can we use those limited palette of colors? Plus, they probably only had those certain colors available to them anyway. That's probably the only colors they had, whether they wanted them or not. It's not like now where you could buy any color of the rainbow. So they're trying to operate with super limited palette. And something I love the most to see in those old tattoos is how they use the skin color like a sort of negative space in the color, which reads as another color. Because especially if it's in an area where it's surrounded by what do you call it? It's like you get on a map, it's like if all of the adjacent colors around it completely lock that color within the tattoo, it's not touching the skin on the outside of the tattoo, if that makes sense, then that reads as a color. It doesn't read as skin most of the time. So you end up allowing yourself to have an extra color that you've earned through cleverly designing it that way, and the best tattoos often, when you really study, you go back to all those sort of classic Sailor Jerry type things. And when you look at the way they've done them, very often there's very little color in there, but it convinces you there's a lot more. It looks like there's a lot more because they've just cleverly done it that way. And they've got just like a little pop of yellow in there, which then makes the other color look brighter, or all these different things going on. And so I think I've lifted some of that approach in there too, with the way I think about gig poster design. So the paper color is important. It's like,
so you have to know about that really early on then.
Yeah, because I've always used, I used to enjoy picking out, and I still do enjoy picking out papers to print on. Like when I was doing the first prints with Burlesque, the screen printer Burlesque of North America, they would encourage me to use French paper, was what they used mostly, which is another American paper company, make really extraordinary, beautiful paper stock. And I got really into using the brown speckle tone papers. I mean, they do all sorts of different colors, but mainly the craft colored speckle tone. And the speckle tone is super cool because it's got all these little flecks of wood pulp and things in there, you know. So it also, the thing I love about that is it leans even further into the idea of this print or poster being a unique, one of a kind thing, because each one is going to be different. There's going to be variation depending on what collection of little imperfections are in the paper,
right,
you know.
right.
So I always loved that. And then using that, if you can have that paper just busting through the image, and rather than it just being all harnessed off, you know, like to actually have sections of the image colored with the paper showing through, it can, it's deeply satisfying if when it works.
It's amazing. So, changing gears a little bit, and before we dive into what you're working on now, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the relaunch of your Patreon. That's something that you relaunched a little over a month ago, I believe. Mm-hmm. I guess, how did you first dive into Patreon as a platform, and what made you think that, you know, Patreon was a good, fit for your work and your practice?
I was not overly familiar with it, to be honest. I was not really. Didn't really know too much about it. I'd kind of heard of it, but my wife Johanna, who is a musician, she's been running a Patreon herself for several years now, and it works really well for her. She has a community of fans of her music who engage with that and get to support her in making her music, and she'll then share with them insights into the writing and, you know, different sort of behind the scenes things and insights into lyrics and all of that good stuff. And for her, it became a really valuable thing as a way to obviously have some financial support from people who are passionate about your work, and then to be able to engage with that community as well in a very direct way and actually build this really beautiful dialogue there directly between you and that community. And there's something specific about doing it that way, where it does feel very direct. You don't have this sort of gatekeeping of anything in between. You know, you can really, really communicate and have a lot of control. I suppose, compared with social media as being like the main outlet for people to show their work and talk about their work, which feels so compromised every step of the way. You know, so there's that side of it, and then also that I've got to a point where I've been really taking a greater interest in wanting to share knowledge and share insight into things. And I've always enjoyed that, but I feel like maybe I think it's just a time and place thing of like being at the certain point in my career, for want of a better phrase, but being at this point where that feels really important to me now. Is recognizing from speaking to young artists and realizing that I have accumulated a lot of knowledge and maybe insight into things that could be valuable to people, you know. So that's a big part of it too. So at the moment, we started it last year, and I say Jo has helped me with it a lot too. So what she'll tend to do, because I think she knows if I sat down and just started writing about a breakdown of a post, I would be there all week, you know. I'd write a fucking essay. So, which I'm sure maybe some people would want that, but like it would just become unmanageable. And I'm terrible at scheduling and timekeeping and all of those things, and I get sucked into those sort of tasks. So the way that we've been doing it is I'll choose a poster that we're going to do as a study or reco cover, and then she'll sit down with me and kind of interview me about it and sort of write up what I'm saying. So actually what you're reading there is kind of one side of an interview almost.
Wow. That's a cool way to do it.
Yeah. I was skeptical at first, but as always, she was right. And it was, it was really cool. And so we'll just sit there and I'll initially be like, this feels weird, you know, but not at all. Like as soon as she'll start asking me about it. And then the thing that's been really rewarding too, actually, is that my experience in making these projects is that during the period when I'm working on them, I'm all in on them, and I'm very one-track minded about immersing myself in this project for this time. The moment it crosses the finish line, I hand over the project, I'm on to the next thing. So I very quickly forget about all the work that was involved in I see these pieces around, but then I'll forget what was involved in the creation of them, or where my mind was when I made them, or what the ideas were behind them even a lot of the time. And then when I'm sitting there with Jo and she's asking me these questions, I'll suddenly be realizing, just remembering cool things that I'm like, oh yeah, I'd forgotten this until you asked, but now you ask, I'm realizing this was the inspiration for this thing, or this was some weird thing I hid in it, or this was some weird technique that I'd never tried before, or all of that stuff. So we've done a few of them. So we did one about the cave-in artwork, which was pretty substantial. We spoke about, because there were so many parts to that, so we kind of went fully into that. And then we did one about the Hereditary poster, and then we did the one most recently about the Tool poster. So and each one then is just broken up into parts, and there'll be like a new part every week or so, or maybe a couple every week. Basically, it spans over a month. We'll do like all these little pieces and sort of little bits of video, and I'll show, if there is like a concept piece or different versions of it, and try and break it all down, or like reference photos, or and it's been, so I'm really enjoying doing it, because I get to actually reflect back on these pieces and be like, oh yeah, there's a lot actually went into this, and so it's nice. Yeah, there's something nice and rewarding personally to be able to do that and explore those things. But my hope with it is just that if people want to come and follow that, and can, especially, well, anyone who's curious about it, but I imagine especially young illustrators and artists, or anyone, if they can learn, or if they can gain some knowledge of something, or more so, I think a lot of it for me is just something I've come to recently, is just realizing that I'd like people to know that most of these projects, I don't have a defined process. I'm operating on the edge of my ability, and just kind of winging it the whole time, and just trying to figure out try something new. Like most of the time, because that's where the exciting stuff happens. It's like when you're trying to push yourself to explore new territory, and it makes it more fun and interesting. And so I'm trying to be really honest and open about that. And I wrote up one. So today I wanted to do something new, something slightly different for the Patreon. And I got up today and just felt inspired to. I like anyone in our game, there's always get asked all the time about materials. Like what the classic, like, what pen do you use question, and
right.
Well, get asked that stuff all the time. Always have, like what pen do you use, what paper is it, what printer is it, what scanner is it, what all of these things. The reality for me, most of the time with that, the answer to that question is like, it doesn't matter. It really does. It matters a bit, but it doesn't matter too much. It's not like some magic wand, and but it's interesting, and we all enjoy talking about that stuff, materials, and I definitely have, love talking to other artists about them, and have seen, and I've been in that position where you're kind of watching a video or something of an artist that you love working, and you get a little glimpse of what the pen is, and you're like, what enhance, like, what is that? What am I, what is that? I want to get that pen, and I've definitely done that myself, and I find that whole pursuit is fun, and can pay off sometimes if you discover something really special. But so what I've done is I took a photo of all my main tools just laid out, and have kind of numbered them, and then I've just sat down today and just wrote about them all, and
nice.
Explained, okay, this is this is this is this, and this is, I picked this up because my artist buddy, whoever, told me how to, said, hey, you've got to check out this pen, this is cool, or I've asked them, so there's like a bunch of different references. Yeah, I've tried to give credit to the people who've told me about these different materials that I'm now passing on, but equally some of them are things that I've just stumbled on. Most of them are really inexpensive, none of it is like high flighty sort of some sort of master craftsman tools. Most of them are like entry level materials that I actually think people get way too crazy about. It reminds me of that thing where getting into playing guitar, and you buy a guitar and then you get obsessed with pedals and accessories and all this bullshit. And it's like, just play the fucking guitar. It doesn't matter, you know? It really doesn't matter. As long as it's not terrible, as long as it's like decent entry level, you know, guitar or whatever you're playing with. It doesn't matter if you're playing a Squier or an Epiphone or whatever. But in the same sense, people, and we all do it. Like, I get bogged down sometimes in just buying materials and setting things up just right and thinking I need to have everything just so. And that's why I embrace things like using a dip pen. Like, the one that I use is the cheapest entry level speedball pen, the most basic thing, which I found to be the best one, and just basic ink, and just go for it. You know, it's like, not, you can get crazy worrying about that stuff. So my point is, I guess, so I've written this piece for the Patreon, which is basically, I'm hoping, like, a lot of the stuff I want to do there is sort of bursting a lot of bubbles for people about worrying about that shit, you know, because it's like, hey, I'll tell you what I know, but also tell you what I don't know, and what's, you know, and a lot of that is really not that important.
Right, right. And you mentioned social media as often being an outlet for this type of I guess, engagement with the community. But you recently took some time off of, I know, Instagram for a little while.
I did.
Was that? I'm sure that was nice to get away from.
It was so nice.
For a while.
Honestly, at the end of it, like I saw, I've got this weird love-hate relationship with it, because I recognize that for me, it is my shop front in terms of thinking of what I do as a business of any kind. And which it is, you know, it's my livelihood, and I need to be serious about that just for practical reasons. But and that has been very true, not only from selling print work, but also for in terms of, like we spoke about earlier, clients who are actually the actual band members and musicians. That's pretty much 90% of where they've discovered my work will be. You know, it's one of those things you almost feel like you don't want to admit it, because there's such a, you know, because of the demonization of social media and of Instagram especially, and which I am definitely partaking. I'm very got issues with the whole thing, and yet the reality of it is, if I'm really honest, is like, 99% of my clients have come through there. In terms of most of the bands I've worked with have discovered me through there, and that's where my shit is known the most, and that's where I have a name for myself enough to be able to sell my work. So I've got to have, you know, it's like, don't bite the hand that feeds sort of thing. Right. But so, as is talked about a lot, just psychologically and emotionally, there's really unhealthy habits that we built up from using these platforms, which you still don't quite know how damaging a lot of this is. And I felt last year, I had a pretty turbulent year, and a lot of stuff happened. And then with, you know, having to move house and all of this stuff, so there was a lot going on last year, and at the same time, I just had this realization of just how much time I was spending getting sucked into that vortex of social media, and feeling that compulsion to post things, especially like story stuff, you know, like having this constant hum in the background of your everyday existence, which is saying to you, like, should I be documenting this? Should I be taking a photo right now? You know, and it's there. And I think I imagine most of us have that now, you know, which is really scary to think about. So even though I might be out on a lovely walk in nature, supposed to be, you know, enjoying myself or just having this nourishing time physically, and then some free headspace, but actually as I'm doing that, there's this tapping on my shoulder saying, hey, you should film, this looks cool, man, this is gonna go a treat, you know, people are gonna appreciate this, you know, why aren't you filming this thing? And
it takes you out of that moment.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's so bad. And I recognize that in myself, and I was, you know, I hate to admit that, but it was like, yeah, it was pretty bad, just feeling that way all the time. And I imagine most people do feel that as well. And so it just felt like a really important exercise for me to say, hey, so I did it as like a New Year's resolution, where I was like, I gave up drinking and smoking and Instagram as these three big things. And the drinking and smoking, I kind of felt that was easy. Like, I've always done that through my life. I kind of I found it pretty easy to get, like, I can go swing either way with those things and be like, so I knew they were easy, and I intended to do them for a month. Smoking, drinking, and Instagram. And then but the Instagram one felt like the big. It was easy to give it up, like some weird vice or something. But I feel like it's the one that had the most impact, in terms of just freeing up time and space and not having to worry about that stuff, not having to think like, oh my God, do I need to be documenting this right now, or and not all of the emotional stuff we feel from it of seeing this weird lens of I know we all talk about this all the time. It's just like seeing this strange curated lens of all these things you should be out there doing, and our brains are not built for that. Our brains are not ready to process that much information, and it's going to lead through some way of self-protection. Is our brains are now just flooding us with anxiety, worrying about how it's going to process all these things. So yeah, all of that. So my intention was to take a month out. And then I ended up taking 6 months out of it. I just because it felt like I think the drinking and smoking crept in sooner, but although I've got a good handle on that too now, which I feel really pleased about. But then with the Instagram stuff, and I'm saying I don't really use other social media outside of that. Everything is kind of pushed from there to Twitter or whatever. But with that, it felt like I was so reluctant to go back to it. It felt like being forced to go back to school after the summer holidays. I was like, no, I don't want to. But I kind of knew I had to at some point. But now going back to it, I'm going back in with a really light touch. So I'm not really posting story stuff. I'm just posting about significant work, or if there's something that is ready to be shared, as a new piece of art. And I try and just limit my time on there, and it just frees up so much space and frees up a lot of those weird anxieties that are built into it. So I don't know how that'll work out in terms of whether I'll take a hit for not being so present on there. But I don't know. I don't think so, because I feel like when I think about artists that I'm into and inspired by, and some of them post a ton of shit on there all the time, and that's cool. But then some of them hardly ever post, and it doesn't change the way if anything, it can make it more special, and you'll see those things and be like, oh my God, this, they've made a cool piece of work, and maybe you haven't seen anything for a few months, but I don't really feel like it matters as much as we think it does, in terms of keeping that presence.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully you stick with that kind of healthy relationship with it, where you keep it at a light touch and at a little bit of an arm's length,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's because it's almost like the putting the cart before the horse thing of like, don't let that be the thing driving your work, and I've definitely had that kind of fallen into that in some ways, or definitely had those feelings of like, hey, am I just, questioning my motivation for like, am I making this thing because it's going to look cool there, or am I making it because I genuinely want to do it? And so, yeah, just checking in once in a while about the order of things in terms of motivation of why you're making the work, and have that be just like more like an afterthought, of like, oh yeah, cool, I'll share this thing. But yeah. So
speaking of what you've been up to, what's been your main focus this year, and what does like the rest of 2023 look like for you?
It's a good question. It's strange because I feel like I've been talking about. I usually talk about gig posters being my main thing, and they have been for a long time. But saying that, I haven't made one in a long time, and don't really have any scheduled in to make either. And the stuff that I've come into this year since I started, because I didn't, there were a few months when I wasn't really making any work because of moving house and studio and all of that stuff. So when I got back into it though, the work that I've been doing was, I did that project for the Wicker Man, which was like the 50th anniversary, kind of like a rebranding of the whole thing actually I ended up doing. So I got to play with some typography and do this illustration, and gathered a bunch of our friends from around here to model for the poster, which was really fun and cool. So we got to this. Yeah, it's kind of cool now that they're all showing up in all these cinemas now and on the movie poster. And so that was a big project. But then I'm in the spirit of always wanting, like, I always want to be engaging in something new and challenging to myself. I've never been down with the idea of just repeating and regurgitating the same stuff over. So I've got to go with what I'm excited by. So I've got things coming in now, like one of them being, I've been working on some creature design for a movie, which I can't really say much. That's all I can really say about it. But it's like movie concept design stuff, which I've always, always been hugely into film my whole life, and I've always dabbled in that and wanted to have a foot in that in some way. And this is a cool way. That I always imagined when I was a kid, and one of my ambitions was like to, it was more I could always identify with the people who did that stuff. Like I grew up always obsessed with watching the making of documentaries about movies I loved all the the creature design stuff, all the Stan Winston and KMB effects and all of that stuff, and Ray Harryhausen, all of this stuff was like a big passion of mine my whole life. So to be able to play around in that world. So that's kind of an ongoing thing now that I'm doing. So I've been working on the first sort of few waves of design for this thing, and then gonna sort of see how that all pans out.
It's amazing.
And then, yeah, I'm enjoying any opportunity to dabble in film stuff and video stuff. And been, I don't know, the last few months I've been sort of hopping around between trying to figure out what I want to be working on. I've been writing ideas for film projects and thinking maybe I want to get more into film, and then just wanting to do different things. But a big thing that's come up for me recently, really recently, after having a bit of a limbo period of not being sure what I want to be making, was a few weeks ago I did a talk in Cardiff at a print convention. It's a new print convention that they've done in Cardiff in South Wales, and I got asked to come and speak there, and it's something that I haven't really done much of. I spoke once. I did one talk in what was the equivalent of my old art school, but they'd moved it to Cardiff now. This could have been like 8 years ago or something now. It was a long time ago that I went and did a talk there, but I don't really remember much about it, and I didn't continue to do that afterwards. And this was like kind of much earlier on for me, I suppose, in terms of my work. So I got asked to come and do this art talk, and I didn't know what I was doing. Like I didn't know if I was going to be able to do it, if it was going to go well, if it was going to be a disaster, if it was what I was going to talk about, any of this stuff. And I tried to plan it, got completely overwhelmed with trying to think, that I was going to have to tell my whole life story and not know how to do it, and how could I fit it all in, and how much was I supposed to show, and all of this stuff. Anyhow, I did it, and I loved it, and I feel like it went well, and people were really responsive, and I feel like people got something from it, and from the feedback I'd heard, and I'd loved it. I just really enjoyed doing it. And that was the main surprise to me, was how much I enjoyed it. And so I feel that's something I want to get more into now, outside of, obviously, the creative side of things is still the main thing, and I'm not sure exactly. I've got a bunch of different weird ideas about what I want to do with that. I kind of want to make, I guess I want to make art more, maybe more like, I guess what people call like personal work, but like things that are not commission based. Maybe like I've got some ideas for some strange, I'm not really going to give it away yet, but some sort of small scale, almost like zine publications, like, just putting out some small kind of little books of collections of art, things like that.
Nice.
Yeah, just once again, just keeping things interesting, making interesting new weird shit, and but yeah, I want to get into doing art talks, and I'm going to be heading out to the States for a couple of months later this year. So if anyone listening wants me to come and talk at your art school, hit me up.
What part of the country are you going to be traveling to?
Mainly East Coast. Okay. So like around New York, but maybe as far down as like Florida, and then, yeah, anywhere in between. But I'm going to be kind of just freewheeling around anywhere that I'm called to. So I'm thinking of putting the word out soon and just saying, yeah, literally, if anyone wants me to come and talk some bullshit, hopefully impart some knowledge and share some thoughts and ideas about art, and talk about my own weird, specific observations, and anything that I can share that might be of value. So awesome. Yeah, that's something I'm excited about. So if anyone wants me to come and talk at your art school or anywhere. It doesn't have to be an art school. Yeah.
I love it. That's amazing. That's really cool. So reach out. Where can people find you online so they can follow all these new things you got going on?
Through the dreaded portal of Instagram, probably. Yeah. Well, what I would say is go to or my website. I got a website. It's just my name, richeybeckett.com. But if you go to my Instagram page, but don't DM me because I probably won't read it, but email me through the email button on there.
Awesome. So last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
Damn. Wow, who would that be? I'm trying to think, who have you had and who, because I know you've had a lot of my art buddies on there. Looping back, you haven't had Sonny and Biddy on here, have you?
No.
So there you go. There's a nice bookend to our conversation. Because I started out talking about those guys, because they came. I don't know if I mentioned this at the top, but they came to visit me this year. Yeah,
wow.
They'd flown over to do a whistle stop tour of the UK, and Sonny had hit me up a few weeks before saying like, "Hey man," he's like, we're gonna. I'm not gonna try and do his accent. He's like, "Hey man, we're gonna be in Hay on Wye, like is around where I live." He's like, "We're gonna be in Hay on Wye in a couple of months' time," and I was like, "What are you doing? Why would you be here?" And he's like, "Visiting you idiot, come and see you." It's like, okay, great. It was awesome. Yeah, it was just amazing. It was so beautiful. Like they hit up all of their sort of UK buddies and came out and visited me here for a couple of days, and it's like super cool to see those guys. So like a nice, just reflecting what we were talking about at the top, just a really cool time of just hanging out, and us sort of reflecting on going back to the OG MondoCon and the really just feel, and of course the time they visited was the day after all of the stuff broke about Mondo and Funko and all of that stuff. So there was a lot to talk about, and but the main thrust of all of that conversation was about just looking back on the incredible opportunities that came from that door being open to us all, and all of everyone there, and just all of the artists, and now all of the key players in just creating something that's, it's almost like only now looking back you realize how important it has been for all of us artists. So shout out to them. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to leave on a sad note, but it is definitely unfortunate the way that all played out. Well, it's not a sad note though. That's the thing. It is like all of those guys are going to go on to do more extraordinary things, of course, and I'm sure that they'll look back and be like, hey, that was just shit changes, stuff's got to change, stuff's got to be exciting, and you've got to be challenged to make, that there's an ongoing theme, and
to that end, I mean, I'm excited to see what like Mitch and Rob and Eric all do. I mean, I'm sure they're going to go on to even bigger things. It's gonna be exciting. Absolutely.
And the thing with it all, like, I don't, whatever the whole politics of all of that shit, whatever, it's like the bottom line is those guys are all just incredible creators of things, and creators and curators of things, and the strength of the community of artists and everyone else in the extended community of followers and champions of all of that art is so fucking solid that it's like that, all of that is going to go, like, those guys are not going to be able to shake that off, it's always going to follow them with anything they do. So I think it's exciting for everyone to see what they get up to next. Yeah.
Awesome. So that's a great note to end on. Richey, thank you so much for doing the show, man. It's really, really good, like, catching up with you and just talking with you more about your background.
Thank you so much, man. What a joy. And I love, the show is great, and I'm really, thank you for doing it, because it's just, really, really solid, good conversation. And, I've really enjoyed doing it. I mean, I'm excited to listen back to many more episodes as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Cool. Well, we'll cut there. What'd you think?
Good stuff.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Richey. It was really cool to talk with Richey about the early part of his journey. I'd never really talked to him about that before. It was interesting to hear how art school really burned him out, up until the point where he ultimately stopped doing it for 10 years to focus on making music. I suspect that, maybe the burnout was a catalyst, but it was ultimately that hyper-focus on one pursuit that Richey talked about that kept him away from it for so long. But then at the same time, it was ultimately his time touring and making merch for his own band that led to him dedicating himself to his art again, almost like it pulled him back in slowly. I'm really eager to learn more about the upcoming film work that he's doing with Monster Design. And like he said, that's been a big part of his life, just like music has. He even mentioned being interested in film studies back in college and taking some classes in it. And while he's made several posters for movies over the years, having the chance to contribute directly to the making of a film sounds like an exciting opportunity. It'll be awesome to see what he's been up to with that. And like he said, if you're in art school in the US right now, hit Richey up to speak at your school. It's pretty cool how much he wants to give back to younger artists and share his experience in that way. I really love to see it. So thanks again to Richey for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. And just a reminder, one big way you could help out if you're really enjoying the show would be to check out the show's Patreon. You can find all the details on patreon.com/artaffairs. And as always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairs.podcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairs.podcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.